Hey everyone, welcome to the September edition of the Tracy Developer Meetup, hosted remotely for the time being. So I'm the Tracy Developer Meetup organizer. I'm Nick Raboy. And today we have special guest Otto Kukic from MongoDB. Oh, there's an echo going on.
That was me.
It's all good. So the topic of the evening will be Next.js and MongoDB, which is going to be pretty cool. Both of us, we both work at MongoDB, but there's interesting stuff going on that Otto's going to talk about. But before we let Otto have the show, I want to go over some logistics. So we are live. This is not a pre-recorded video. This is a live stream on YouTube. So please, if you have questions, engage with us in the chat. I will be actively moderating the chat. Otto will be peeking in occasionally, but I'll stop him if there's a good question that comes through. If there's any kind of audio or video issues that I don't catch, please drop that in the chat as well. Let us know about it early so that way we can fix it. I'll put out, I'll give you more logistics towards the end of the meetup as well, as far as the group and upcoming events, things like that. But I think for now, Otto, the show is yours. Why don't you give us an introduction?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me at the Tracy Developer Meetup. So a little bit about me. My name is Otto Kukic, and I work at MongoDB with Nick. We both work on the Atlas team. We're both developer advocates, and our day-to-day jobs are to help developers learn MongoDB. And by night, I am a huge fan of Next.js, and whenever I have some free time, all I love to do is code and build some cool applications. And Next for me has made coding fun again. So today I'm going to introduce you guys to Next.js, the React framework for production. If you're brand new to Next, this will be a great introduction. If you used Next before or React before, I think it'll be, you're sure to pick up some new tricks. And we're also going to use Next with MongoDB and show you how the two technologies interact and help you build your applications faster and better. So with that said, I think we can just dive right in. And as Nick said, if you have any questions, comments, if you want me to speed up, slow down, feel free to let me know. And I have many monitors all around. So if I'm looking at different screens, I'm probably just looking at a comment or a doc, or just trying to see what's going on. But with that said, let's dive in. So, before we get into the code and building some cool, fun apps, answer in the chat if you've used Next.js before. And if you have used Next.js, let me know what your favorite thing about it is. And while we wait for comments to come in, I'll tell you guys a little bit about React, or a little bit about Next.js, what it is, how it works, and why you should consider using it for your next front-end application. So I'm here on the Next.js homepage, and their big headline is that Next.js is the React framework for production. And why that's the case, we can look at the docs here and information and see what Next.js does. And essentially what Next.js is, it is a framework built on top of React. So if you are a React developer and if you've worked with React before, it is just a tiny library for building really powerful UIs and user interfaces. Next.js kind of adds all of those missing pieces. It adds server-side rendering and static-side generation so that you can build an app that works really well with SEO. It has TypeScript support built in. It has a file-based routing system so that instead of having to bring in another library to help you with routing of your spy application, it's built into Next.js. There's incremental static regeneration, which we'll talk a little bit about. And I think the coolest part about Next.js is its support for API routes. So as you're building your application, you are eventually going to hit a moment where you need to have some private data, some private backend calls that you don't want living in the browser. And with API route support in Next.js, you can add this very, very easily. And you'll see how all of this works. So I'm just looking to see if there's any comments. And hi, Roman. Thanks for joining. I see you haven't worked with Next.js yet, so today you'll kind of get a primer on it. So we'll be working a lot with Next.js, and I know I've been saying Next.js a lot, so I'll try to cut it out. The other technology that we're going to be using in our application is called MongoDB. And if you worked with MongoDB in the past, leave a comment and let me know if you worked with it, what you think of it, as I do a little introduction. So MongoDB and MongoDB Atlas is a software as a service database, essentially. And what this is going to allow us to do is host our database and host all of our data in the cloud without having to do any of the management of standing up and managing our own database. And MongoDB Atlas, it has a free tier, which we're going to be using. So if you're just building an application and just want to get started quickly, I think MongoDB Atlas is the best way to do it. And we're going to show you how this works and how it integrates into Next.js. So, so with that said, let's dive right into building our application and building some cool stuff. And as Nick said, if you have any questions, shoot them in the chat. And Roman is tuning in from Tracy, so he is in California. And thank you for joining the online meetup for now. And hopefully, I'm able to make it out to Tracy in the future when we can have in-person events again. So the best way to get started with Next.js is with the npx package manager. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code, and we're going to start by creating a brand new Next.js application. And to do that, what we're going to do is run an npx command called npx create next app. And what this is going to do is it's going to bring in all of the Next.js dependencies and basically set up a sample app for us. The cool thing about this create next app call is that we can make it even better. So since we're going to be working with MongoDB, we already have a MongoDB integration with Next.js. So to pull in all of that code, we simply just pass in an extra parameter to the create next app call called example, and we're going to say with MongoDB. What this is going to do is it's going to bring down the exact Next.js application that already has our MongoDB integration, and we'll go over what that code looks like as we start building our app. And then the last parameter we need to pass in is the name of our application, and we'll just call it Tracy app. So with that command typed out, and we'll hit enter, and this is going to take a couple seconds to download all of our dependencies, and then we're going to have an app ready to go in our new Tracy app directory. So we are ready to go there. I will hit cd Tracy app, which is going to take us one directory over into our code, and then we can run npm run dev to start our application. But before we do that, let's open up this directory so we can kind of go over it and explain what's happening. So here we are, Tracy app. We'll open that folder, and yes, we trust the authors. Open our terminal again, and before we start our application, let's examine the code a little bit. And let me see if there's any comments. And yes, Roman, this will be available afterwards. And Santosh, welcome to the webinar as well. So we just ran the npx create next app command, which created a starter Next.js application for us. And before we run the application, let's kind of take a look at what we have. We have a bunch of our node modules, which we don't need to go into. It's any next node project that you work with is going to have a bunch of these. We have this library or lib folder, which has our MongoDB integration, and we'll get into that in just a second. And then we have our pages, which has our starter, basically our homepage. And that's pretty much it. And then we have our public folder, which has our favicon and the Vercel logo. And if we were to start this application up by running npm run dev, we can see what the application looks like in development mode. So running npm run dev starts our application on localhost 3000. So let's go ahead and navigate there. Localhost 3000. It's going to give us an error, and this is actually expected because we didn't set up our environment variables to be able to connect to the application. So with that Next.js with Mongo example, we are required to give it the MongoDB URI. Otherwise, it's not going to run. So
Hey,
so
Anna,
far, so good.
just for the
Yep.
sake of being able to see this actual error, can you zoom in just a bit
Yes, I can.
so we can put two and two together? Sweet.
There we go.
Thank you. Awesome.
So again, you can see we have a server error, and it says, please add your Mongo URI to .env.local. So we can go back into our code here, and there's an env.local.example that we can rename, and we'll just get rid of this example so that we do have an environment variable that we can work with. And what we need to provide it is our MongoDB URI. And at the moment, we don't have a MongoDB cluster set up. So the next step we're going to do is go ahead and set up our cluster on MongoDB Atlas to be able to connect to our MongoDB database. So let's do that next. I will open up a new window here, and let's go to mongodb.com/atlas and sign in. And let me zoom in as well so that let's see what's going on.
It'd be cool if there was like a browser mode that said like special preserve the settings for certain scenarios button.
Right. Unfortunately not. So I am logging into MongoDB Atlas. And
we have a question for, I think this is a question or a statement, I'm not sure. You could spin off a Docker image of MongoDB locally as well. Would this work for the given scenario that you're going over?
Absolutely. So in our Next.js starter, all we need is a connection to MongoDB. So whether you're hosting it locally, so whether you have like the community edition installed on your PC or Mac, or you have it running in a Docker container or your own cloud deployment, wherever MongoDB is hosted, as long as you can get the connection URL, you are good to go. And in this instance, we're just going to use MongoDB Atlas, which is going to simplify all of that database management for us to make it happen. So going back in here, and let me zoom in. So I did set up a cluster earlier, about 3 hours ago, for our Tracy meetup. And I did load some sample data in it as well that has a bunch of databases. And these databases come pre-installed when you are working with MongoDB Atlas. So if you just want to try out MongoDB and kind of learn how it works, and you want sample data to play with, there is 7 or 8 different repositories, and we're going to be using the one called sample_mflix for movie flicks. And what this is going to have is a number of collections containing movie data and reviews on the movies, users who leave comments about movies and stuff like that. But the collection that we're going to be most concerned with is the movies collection. And this is going to have information about 23,000 movies.
Are you able to zoom in slightly so that way we can get a good idea of what the data looks like? Yeah, this section's kind of small.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that looks good. If it's too small, please drop us a message in the chat and we can make it larger.
Sounds good. Please let us know. So if we are looking at it, we have 23,000 documents. And this is kind of what our movies are going to look like. I'll zoom one out just so we can see the documents and the fields within the document. So we have an _ID for the ID of the movie, the plot of the movie, its name, its cast, the genres that it's part of, where the movie has been released and its IMDb information, Rotten Tomato ratings, and much, much more. So each movie has kind of a similar schema. Some of them are going to have more information than others, but we have a whole bunch of movies to play with. So now that we've looked at our database, we looked at the data that we're going to be working with. Let's figure out how we're going to connect to our cluster. So I will go back to the databases section and hit this connect button. And what this is going to do is, first of all, it's going to tell us that we can't connect yet because we haven't set up our, so we haven't enabled the MongoDB Atlas firewall access rules to allow a user to access our database. So I'm going to add my current IP address, which is going to allow my instance, me to connect to the database. And then let's create a user, and we'll call this user Tracy, for example, for the Tracy meetup. And let's add a password. So now that we have our IP address, so now that we know that MongoDB can connect from my IP address and we have a database user, we're ready to connect. So we'll choose a connection method. And in this case, we're going to connect to our application. We can connect via MongoDB Compass or the shell if we just wanted to execute commands. But since we are building a full application, we're going to connect to our app. And what we're going to want to get from here is our connection string. So this MongoDB plus SRV, and then the long string to our cluster. I'm just going to copy that, go back into Visual Studio Code and paste it into our MongoDB URI. And then let me also view word wrap. Now, the last thing I need to do here is add the password. So it pre-filled our username, but the password we need to provide here. And I think I set the password as MongoDB. Save the file, and I will restart the application so that it can properly load that environment variable and connect to our MongoDB instance. So clear this here, run npm, run dev again. And we'll see a message in here that we loaded our environment variables from tracyapp.env.local. So we didn't have to do anything extra. Next.js handled all of this for us. By just having the .env.local file, it knew that we probably had environment variables we wanted to work with, and it loaded them. And then if we look at our, well, actually, let's take a look at the application, and then we'll get back to seeing where this environment variable is being used. So let's go back into our code here. And now it automatically refreshed and gave me the kind of default Next.js welcome page saying welcome to Next.js with MongoDB. And it also gave me this message saying that you are connected to MongoDB. And to get started, building your application, start by editing the pages/index.js route. So let's take a look at this code here. So if we open up pages index, and let's just change this welcome to welcome Tracy devs. Save. Go back into our app. We can see that we automatically updated that message, and Next.js has kind of built-in cache invalidation as well as live reloading. So every time we make a change to any of our code, it's automatically going to rebuild the application for us automatically. That's kind of another nice thing that's just built into Next.js. And then to see that you're connected to MongoDB message, we check a variable called isConnected that gets fed into the home component. And to see where this isConnected message variable is coming from, it is at the very bottom here in this get server side props method. And the way that get server side props works is in Next.js, we have multiple ways of working with our data. So we have multiple ways to fetch data. So if you're building if you're treating it like any old React application, you don't have to use get server-side props. And what's going to happen is you would have to get all of your data up here in the actual function itself. So we could, do a fetch call to an API to get data and then load it into our view. And we could, use state or probably put it in a use effect to have it run once. But with Next.js, we have this special function called get server-side props. And what this is going to do is it's going to make that page, this index page, render on the server. And this is the first function that's going to be called. And the code in here, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to await this client promise. Once we have the client, we're going to call the isConnected method on it. And this client is our MongoDB database connection. And if the client is connected, it's going to come back true. If the client is not connected, it's going to come back false. And then we just pass it as a prop into our home component. So again, if I scroll up here, we can see that we're capturing that isConnected prop. We're just deconstructing it from our props and then displaying either you are connected to MongoDB or you're not connected, and check the README for instructions. And then that client promise, that's coming from our library MongoDB package. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that code looks like and what it does. So I'll open up mongodb.js. And here we are using, the first thing we're doing is importing MongoDB and the Mongo client. So if you work with MongoDB with Node.js in the past, we just brought in the MongoDB package and we're getting the Mongo client out of it. And then we are getting our URI from the environment variable, so our MongoDB URI, setting our options for the connection to MongoDB using the unified topology and the new URL parser. And then here's where that error we saw earlier when we didn't have the URI defined. If we don't have it, it's going to throw up a server error telling us we need a Mongo URI before we can connect. And then for performance reasons, we check to see if we are in the development environment. And if we are, then we create a Mongo client promise and set it to the global variable. And what this is going to do is it's going to keep our MongoDB keep our connection to MongoDB active even as that server rebuilds. And this was kind of a performance a performance best practice that we found works best with Next.js, because every single time you make a change, if you don't have it in the global variable, it's going to make another connection to MongoDB, and it's going to kind of, eventually, if you're making too many changes too quickly, you're going to hit that connection limit, and it's going to, Mongo's going to start running very slowly. But if you are not in production, in development mode, if you're in production, then we are just going to go ahead and use the new Mongo client, pass in our URI with our options, and call client.connect, which is going to be that client promise, and then we export it. So this is all the code we need to get our connection to MongoDB and be able to talk to a MongoDB database. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions so far, if any of this isn't making sense, or if I'm doing a good job, let me know as well. So we'll close out the mongodb.js, and we can close out our environment.local variable. And one other thing I want to do here really quickly before we move on is add Tailwind CSS to our project. And I'll just do it the simple CDN way. And that's going to allow us to make our UI a little prettier. So let's see. Here I'm going to get a URL to Tailwind CSS, and we're just going to add it here in the head of our Next.js application. And this is another unique thing about Next.js is there is this special component called called the head component that comes from Next head, and this allows us to set any of the head metadata in our Next.js application. So title, link, any scripts that we want to bring in, or anything like that. And in this case, we're just adding the Tailwind CSS package.
Otto, question.
Sure.
You just included the actual minified CSS file for Tailwind. What if you wanted to include their packaged version so that way you can do stripping of components that you don't need, etc.? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. So if we wanted to install, and I should actually show you how to do that as well. So let's see.
Does Tailwind, not Tailwind, does the Next.js framework that you've set up, does that include everything necessary to actually do that, what post CSS typically does, and etc., to strip out things you're not using?
So yes, if we were to go through the multiple step process of adding the proper Tailwind CSS to Next.js, then yes, it would, we would add post CSS, and I could actually probably do it. It'll take like 2 seconds, but here, we'll open up a new terminal window.
Oh, if it's that fast, let's do it for sure.
Yeah, I will run npm install Tailwind CSS, the latest version. We'll get post CSS and auto prefixer.
That's right off their website, right?
Yep. So I'm on the Tailwind CSS website, and I'm just going through their list of commands. So the first thing we need to do is install Next.js. And
ooh, that looks nasty.
Let's see what happened here.
Is that terminal that you're using inappropriate for npm, or?
It shouldn't be. Let me try it one more time. There we go.
That was weird.
Yeah, you know how npm is. Sometimes you just got to run it twice.
Sure.
So once we have our npm dependencies of Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer, the next thing we're going to do is run npx tailwind css init. And what this is going to do is it's going to create our post CSS config file with Tailwind CSS and auto prefixer, as well as our tailwind.config.js file, where we can add any additional Tailwind CSS plugins. We can decide which pages to purge, add any of our variants, any theme extensions, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think the last thing we need to do is just include Tailwind CSS in our global styles. So we can do, or actually we can actually just pull it in right up here, import Tailwind CSS from the Tailwind CSS npm package. And then we should be able to delete our link here. And let's see if I might have to restart the app because of post CSS and the Tailwind config. So let me do that. And if we go back to our application, let's see if that changed anything. It looks like it did. So our UI looks slightly different, but let's try a Tailwind CSS command and see if it works. So let's do color green 500. Back to our application. Did it not work? Let's see, what do we do? Is this title being overwritten? Oh, there we go. So that worked. I might have my text screen.
Wouldn't that make it? All right. I was going to say, wouldn't that make it the same color?
It would.
All right.
So there we go. We have Tailwind CSS installed now. It is running, and we built it the way you're supposed to. If you're planning on using Tailwind CSS, you can do it via the CDN way, but for our use case, we'll bring it in the proper way and show you how to do it. So we're good there. For the next part, let me go ahead and clean up all of this kind of starter code. Like, we don't care about the default Tailwind CSS styles, so I'll remove those. And I'll just remove all of this extra code now. Let's say H1, building modern apps with Next.js and we'll add a class name of text 5XL. So there we go. We are looking good there. And then let's also add a container here. Container, MX Auto. And these are Tailwind CSS classes that are going to help us center our content and make it look good. Class name, container. What am I doing wrong? The joys of live coding, right? Oh, it looks like it's because we have two containers.
We're having some discussion in the chat about what's so good about Tailwind. You want to give your 2 cents on why Tailwind is so great?
Sure, absolutely. I love Tailwind CSS because it is very unopinionated in how you build your UI. So it just gives you a bunch of utility classes to build your UIs, which I think is superior to like Bootstrap's model of giving you kind of pre-built components. And then when you go to edit those components out, you start running into issues with overriding styles, and it's just much more difficult to build scalable UI components. I feel like with Next.js or with Tailwind CSS, you just have a bunch of utility classes for your padding, for your margins, for your layouts, and you just you end up writing a lot more classes in your code. But I think it makes it much easier to build unique user interfaces. And then when you have a component that you're happy with, you can very easily extract it into an actual component with Tailwind CSS, and then you can just use it with a few classes. So I'm a huge fan of Tailwind. But yeah, that's my quick spiel on Tailwind. And so I am zoomed in, so that's why it looks like not much has changed. But yeah, we can see that the MX Auto class with margin left and right is set to auto, and our container with the max width 1536 is set. These are Tailwind classes, so we are good to go. The next thing I want to do is bring in some data from MongoDB, because right now we are getting access to our MongoDB client, and we're just sending back that message saying, are you connected or not? But that's not very interesting. So let's get some data. Let's get some actual data from MongoDB, from that Mflix collection, from that movies collection, and display it in our application and show you how easy it is. So the first thing I'll do is I'll create another variable for my database. So I will do const.db equals client.database, and then give it the name of my database, which in this case is, let's browse our collection here. It's going to be called sample_mflix. So we'll go back in here, say sample_mflix. Now, you don't necessarily have to do it this way. You could, write client.db sample mflix and then run the command. But I find it always easier to create another variable for your database. It just makes it a little bit cleaner to write your commands. So now that we have our database variable, we can use it to execute MongoDB commands. So the command I'll write is, let's say const movies equals database.find. And I'm not going to pass in, I'll just pass in an empty object for our list of movies. So we'll just get the first 20 movies in our collection. And we'll set that to an array so that we get our movies in an array. Otherwise, if we don't call this to array method, what's going to happen is we're going to get back a cursor, which we would have to manually iterate over to get our data. And from here, let's get rid of the disconnected, and we'll just send back our movies. And up here, we'll say movies as well as our prop. And since this this command returns a promise, we are going to await it. So we're going to say await db.find. And actually, we forgot our collection. So we need to do db.collection. So which collection are we looking at? If we go back to our code here, we have comments, movies, sessions, theaters, and users. We want the movies collection. Almost forgot that. And then we're going to run the .find with an empty object, meaning just give us the first 20, and that limited to the first 20. Otherwise, we're going to get back all 23,000 movies, and we'll be sitting here for a minute. So with that said, let me delete all of these comments so it's not confusing. We'll hit save, and now when we go back to our application, we should see our list of 20 movies. And actually, let me just console log it here so that we see it in the browser. Going back into our application, hitting refresh, we are going to get an error. And again, I anticipated this would happen, but I wanted to show it to you guys and show you why it happens and how to get around it. So the server error that we're getting is a serializing error saying that movies at index 0 underscore ID returned from get server side props cannot be serialized. Please only return JSON serializable data types. Now, the reason that this happens when we call get server side props in Next.js is that the only things that we can pass into our components are just plain old JavaScript objects, and we can't pass in any special data types that we get back from MongoDB, like the underscore ID. So there is a kind of hacky workaround for this. And I've been working with the Next.js team to see if there's a better solution for it. But the solution for now that I found is we'll rename this const movies to const data. And then we'll set a new variable called const movies. And what we're going to do is we're going to first JSON stringify the data that we get back. And then since we want to be able to work with that data, we're going to parse it. So I know this looks a little ugly, but it does work. So we're going to first JSON stringify our data, which is going to forcefully convert all of our data types into plain old JavaScript objects, and then we're going to parse those and make them objects that we can interact with, set them to that movie's variable or constant, and then send it as a prop. So I will hit save here, go back into the application, and let's open up the console here to see if we got our list of movies. And we did. So far, so good. We got an array of 20 different movies. We got all of the information about the movies. So here, this is blacksmith scene. It's unrated. There's the plot for it, and et cetera, et cetera. So we have our movies, but let's display it in our application. I think it's fun seeing it in the console, but it's much better seeing it in the actual UI. So we'll go back in here in our home component, which right now we are just going to be working with React. So if you're familiar with React, you should feel right at home. Let's create a new container And what we're going to do is use Tailwind components to create a grid. So let's say div class name flex wrap. And we're going to create, say, if we have movies, n, if we have movies, we're going to map over that movies array. Movies.map. We're going to get an individual movie. And then let's just, for now, display the movie name. So let's say h2 movie.title. And let me just make sure this is all right. These components. So now when we go into our application, we should see our list of movies, the 20 movies that we got back from MongoDB. And right now our UI is a little ugly, so let's go ahead and fix that up a little bit. So what I like to do is always use these blank curly braces to make React happy, and then we can go crazy in our UI. So let's go ahead and create a div, a width of, say, 1/4 of the page, and a little bit of padding, say 16. Get a border, and let's see what that looks like in our app. Okay, so we got a grid 4x5. We got our 20 movies, and it's looking a little better. Let's also add some margin here. So margin Y, 16. Okay, cool. So far, so good. We got data from MongoDB. We're using Tailwind CSS for our UI, and everything is looking good. Does anybody in the comments have any questions, anything specific that they want to see? If not, I'll just continue building what I had in mind. But if you have any questions, or if there's anything that you would like to see in regards to Next.js, please let me know. But now that we have our data, let's see what we can do with it. So I'm going to look at the console and see what interesting information we get about the movies. So let's see. And Nick, if you have any suggestions as well, open. I'm taking requests.
No, I'm still learning Next.js. I know I've seen you do it a few times. I've seen other people do it a few times. It's still wizardry to me. Maybe because I don't do that much JavaScript stuff anymore, but it's pretty dope.
Sure. Well, then I will continue. And
yes, please.
As questions arise, please ask in the comments, or Nick, let me know what you want to see, and I will do it. Roman asks, why was there empty brackets? Where did we have empty brackets? These right here. I will assume these empty brackets. So I'll just assume that you were asking about this, and if it's not, please let me know and I will clarify it. But the reason that we put empty brackets, and we didn't have to put empty brackets in here, in the find command, what we can do is filter our movies based on all sorts of criteria. So any of the attributes here in our movies, we can filter our data on. So let's just say we wanted to get movies that were released in a particular year. what we can do is in the brackets here, we can say, give me 20 movies that were released in 2011. So this is going to change our list of movies, and the first 20 movies that were released in 2011 that we have in our database is what we're going to get back. And let's just confirm that that did work. I'll refresh here, and as you can see, we get a whole new list of movies, and Cowboys and Aliens, Romeo and Juliet, these do look like 2011 movies, but we can confirm it by, actually, let's do it in here. We can say paragraph release date is movie dot year, I believe, is the field. So if we go back into our application, we can see that all of these, excuse me, all of these movies were released in 2011. And we can run multiple filters. So we can say, give me all the movies released in 2011. And what are some other interesting areas to filter on?
Roman just popped up again. He was referring to line 23 of your code rather than that find statement.
Line 23. Oh, okay. So the empty brackets here are when you create a React component, you have to have one top level div. So, in this case, I guess I didn't need it. I could remove it, and it's going to work just fine. But let's just say I wanted to have another top level div here doing something else, right? Blah, blah, blah. It is going to complain. And if I hover over the error, it'll say the JSX expression must have one parent element. And if you don't want to use a div, if you want something that the browser is going to ignore, then you can just pass in an empty bracket. And that's going to take care of it. And then you can have as many kind of parent divs at the top level, excluding this top level bracket. So that's why I did that. It's just a force of habit for me. And now you can see that we get that user interface. Cool. But yeah, so let's see what other areas we can filter on. So we're filtering by year here, and we can change it. Let's say maybe 2013, and let's say movies that have a longer runtime, or let's do something more interesting. Let's say movies that have a high IMDb rating. So we can pass in another expression and say movies that are that have a rating, and I think the rating, so it's imdb.rating. So we'll say imdb.rating. So if you are working with MongoDB data, you can have one-to-one relationships, which is a field and a value. You can have objects. So here we have a field IMDb that is an object that has multiple fields below it. You can have arrays. You can have objects within objects. You can go as complex or as simple as you want. But when you want to access data or filter on data that is nested, we use the dot notation. So here we're going to do imdb.rating as our second filter, and we'll say we'll run another operator called greater than, and let's say 7.5. So what this is going to do, what this query is going to do, is it's going to find movies that were released in the year 2013 that have an IMDb rating that's greater than 7.5. So let's see if there were any good movies released in 2013. We go back, refresh, and we get a bunch of new movies. And let's just confirm in our UI, I'm waiting for the movies is movie.imdb.rating. Going back in here, and as you can see, all of the movies that we have now are 8, 7.6, 8.2, 7.6, et cetera, et cetera. So everything is greater than 7.5. Were there any really good movies released? Let's say greater than 9. Refresh. And it looks like 2013 was not a good year for very popular movies. So let's drop that back down to maybe an 8. And now we get this list of movies.
So none of the Marvel movies were released in 2013. I feel like all of those get higher than an 8, no? Or unless that was Thor: Dark World or something that year.
Well, like superhero movies, they're great. They're such a fun time, but I feel like they never do really, really well critically.
Maybe.
I don't know. I feel like they're usually, like, even the good Marvel ones, they're still hovering in like the 7-8 range. I guess the Academy doesn't look too highly upon superhero movies.
That's that Martin Scorsese is doing that, right? He's
Yeah.
anti-Marvel.
Cool. So now that we've shown how to get data from MongoDB, let's show off some other cool Next.js features. So the next feature I wanted to kind of go into is displaying information for just a single movie. And this is going to highlight how routing works in Next.js. And it works really, really simply. You just create a new file, call it whatever you want the new page to be. Let's say movie. Save it, and you just create a component. Here, I'll just copy everything I had on the index page for now. Save it, and now we can go to the movie route, and it's going to load in the same information. And
you have a compliment. You have a compliment coming in from Tejas. I'm not sure how to say that name.
Hey, Tejas, great to meet you, and you're very welcome. If you have any questions, please send them my way. Anything you want to know, I'm happy to cover. So here, let's just say this is the movies page. We'll hit save, and so if we go to localhost 3000/movie, we get this is the movies page. If we go back to our index, we get the building modern apps, and if we go to a route that doesn't exist, let's just say something like this, we're going to get a 404 page not found because that route doesn't exist. Now, so this is if we wanted to have named pages, right? So if we wanted to have a page called movie or about us or contact or something static, we could do it this way. But what if we wanted a dynamic route? If, we might want the user to be able to put in a movie ID and get a movie get the information for that specific movie. To do that, what we would do is simply rename our route, and actually, I'll just create a new one. And what I'll do is open up curly brackets and then in JS, and we'll say movie ID. And again, I'll paste all of the information for the component just so that I don't have to build it from scratch. But now we have this movie_ID slug created. So what this is going to do is now any page that we go to, we're now going to get a 404. We are going to load this specific route because this acts essentially as a catch-all, and it actually gives us the movie ID, which we can capture. And to capture that, what we're going to use is the next router. So we'll import router, right? Or no, we'll import use router from next router. And when our component gets loaded here, and we could just rename it for clarity, we'll say movie details. And then we don't need to change anything else. The first thing we're going to want to do is get access to our router. So call this hook. And the way we're going to do that is we'll say const router equals use router. And then we can say const movie ID equals router.query. And then let's just console log the movie ID. Let's see if this works. So we'll go back into the app here, inspect, and there we go. We have our movie ID, which in this instance happens to be AKSDFJSK, but that's because that's what we put up here. And if we change it to, let's say, numbers 1293412, again, our query is here. So we're able to capture our query parameter and display it in our component. Now, to get information about this movie, what we could do is run the get server side props, get the ID here, and make a call to our database. And that would be, I think, the sensible thing to do. But since we're here to learn Next.js, why don't we do something different, just to show you different ways of interacting with data with MongoDB and Next.js. And what we're going to do is create an API route. So in Next.js, if we create a special protected directory called API, what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to create API endpoints that run on the backend and execute data. So what we're going to do is create an endpoint, create essentially a RESTful HTTP endpoint to get specific movie information. And so we'll call it movie details. Movie details works. .js. And the way that this is going to work is in our movie details component, we are going to export a default function, call it a handler. That's going to take a request and response. And just to make sure that this API route works, let's just respond with a message of it works. Now, if I go into my Next.js application, go into the API endpoint and call movie details, I'm going to get a RESTful HTTP response that sends the message of, hey, it works. Now, the cool part about this is in our index, in our movie ID, in our movie.js, we're bringing in this MongoDB library. And we can do the same for our API component. So we don't have to do any extra wrangling, any extra setup, any extra configuration. We simply just import our client promise from MongoDB. And here we're going to have to go one library up. And from here on out, we can use MongoDB in our RESTful components as well. So what we're going to do, export default. Let's see here. Sorry. We could just copy this exactly as is. So get our client promise from the MongoDB library, and then get an instance to our database, which is sample mflix. And then since this is an await, this function needs to be async. So we're going to export default async function. And that should all work. And just to make sure that it does, let's run this same query here. And we'll change it in a second. But I thought I had wrap enabled. Get our data, and then we'll just send the data in our response. So all we did was copy our code from the get server side props, send it into a API RESTful component, and then send that data. So now if we refresh this movie details, we get our movie information in JSON format that we can work with. But what we want to do in this movie details page is get information on a single movie based on the ID of the movie that the user provides. So let's go in to Visual Studio Code and what we're going to do is capture the query parameters. And I believe it is, let's say, query is request query dot whatever our ID is going to be. So let's say movie underscore ID. Well, let me just make sure that that one is correct. So if we go and call movie ID of the parameter 123, should see our query being 123, and we do, so we are good there. And now instead of running this find operation, which is going to get a list of movies for us, we just want to get the specific movie that we ask for. So we're going to say, instead of find, we're going to say find one, and we can get rid of the limit and the array because we're only getting one item back. And our filter is going to be on the ID field, and it's going to be that query. But we are also going to run into an issue if we just do it this way, and I'll show you what that issue is. So let's go back to our application, copy a random ID here, use it as our ID.
We have a question coming in too, Otto.
Sure.
So now that we introduced an API, shouldn't we rewrite the UI part to not use Mongo directly, but go through an API instead?
We will.
Oh, all right. Perfect.
We will. And that is a good point. So the Next.js team, they actually recommend, if you are writing API endpoints, to do it in Get server side props. But I just want to, so, if your React component needs data that comes from an API, it's, the recommendation is to use Get server side props, since this already runs in the backend and is never exposed to the client, to run it in Get server side props. But if you wanted API functionality, you want it to make a RESTful API that anybody can consume, then doing it the way I'm doing it right now is the way to go. But to show you why this wouldn't work, so I've just copied the ID for the Wolf of Wall Street, and I'm going to hit enter. And this isn't going to return back any data. And the reason for it is this query parameter is a string, while our object ID in our database is actually an object ID. So it's not a string. So what we're going to need to do is convert our string to an object ID. And to do that, what we're going to do is very simply, let's see here. Sorry, I'm getting all my windows mixed up. What we're going to do is wrap this new query, since it's already a string that represents our object ID. We'll say new object ID and just wrap it in parentheses. And we're going to have to bring in this object ID from MongoDB. So we can say import object ID from MongoDB. So now we should be able to get information on just a single movie, and I can remove this query. Go back in here, fingers crossed, refresh, and boom. So now we get information on just a single movie based on its ID. So in this case, we have The Wolf of Wall Street. So now let's go back to our application. Let's go to localhost 3000 and just pass in our ID. So we're getting the movie details. Let's update this component to get information on just that single movie, being The Wolf of Wall Street. So what we're going to do is go into our movie ID page right here, and we can use effect from React. So let's say import use effect. So when our application is run, we're going to get the router, we're going to get the movie ID, and we can actually and we'll say use effect, it's a function, and we only want this to run once, so we'll pass in an empty set of brackets here. We'll say fetch HTTP 2000 API movie details, and it was, let's see this for now, movie details, movie ID, and we'll hard code it for now, but we'll fix it in just a minute. And we'll say const data, or const data equals fetch. And then since we can't use async await in a use effect, we'll say data dot then movie and I think that's right. Let's run it and make sure we're good. And if not, well, we will fix it. The joys of live coding. Inside the body, that's gonna happen. So we did get an error. What did we do? Use effect. Calls an empty function. If I get rid of all of this. Try it out. Okay, so hooks can only be called inside of the body of a function component. I'm doing something funky. So let's see. I feel like it's right. And Nick, if you know what's going on, feel free to jump on and help me out.
I haven't spotted it yet, but I did put it in the chat to see if anyone else can spot it.
Well, I think one thing we can do, since useEffect is not cooperating with me, we can actually go down to our get server side props and run the fetch command. So just so I don't waste your guys' time on the stream, let's just copy this and we'll go down here. We could remove all of this code. We'll say fetch, and let's just make sure we get the, and now we can actually await this. And we'll say const movie equals JSON. We'll do that as well. Console log movie. Send our movie via props. And then we don't even need the router up here because we're going to handle all of it in our get server side props function. So let's just make sure that this works. And then we'll go back and clean it up. More errors, cannot resolve DNS. That's fine because we are bringing in the Mongo library and not using it. And movies, get rid of all of this. Movie. Awesome. So it does work. So now we are calling from get server side props. We are making a fetch request to our API movie details, passing in our movie number, our movie ID, getting that data, and then passing it in as a prop. So we'll say movie details for movie.title, and let's just display the movie's picture. Here we'll say image source is the movie.poster exists. And let's see what that looks like. So we got movie details for the Wolf of Wall Street and the poster for the movie, but we could put anything in here and we'll always get the Wolf of Wall Street because we have hard-coded the movie ID here, and we can fix this by getting, I believe it's, let's see, context. I think it's query. Let me just console log this whole object here. Let's see what we get. We don't need the movie. Actually, I think there might be a simpler way to do it. Yep. So context.query.movieID is what's going to allow us to get the specific movie ID from our movie ID route. And what we're going to do here is use backticks, and then we will add the actual query, context.query.movieID for our movie ID. So now you're going to have to pass in a movie ID that exists to be able to see the information for the movie. So in this case, let's go and get it for the Wolf of Wall Street. And we get what we'd expect. If we go to the home page and let's get a different movie. In this case, I will get, I don't know, let's say this movie, get its ID. Boom, that works. So now we have another route that has information for our movies. And if we were to pass in a bad ID, we're going to get an error because we didn't get data, we didn't get a successful response back from our API call. We got back an empty object, which we couldn't serialize into JSON. So our app is going to crash, which is to be expected. We're just doing a quick demo app, not doing a whole lot of error handling. Cool. So that's file-based routing and adding dynamic links and dynamic pages. I showed you how to build an API endpoint. So that's looking good. The final thing I wanted to show, unless anybody has any specific questions or requests, is static site generation with Next.js. And I think this is probably one of the coolest features of Next.js. And what this allows us to do is generate our pages ahead of time. So let's say we had this list of 20,000 movies, and the data is in there and it's not changing. It's not going to constantly change. So what we can do is generate all of these pages at build time so that when we deploy our application, when a user hits a page, details for a specific movie, what it's going to do is it's just going to serve HTML. It's not going to make the call to MongoDB. There's not going to be that round trip to get the data and populate it. It's going to do all of it at build time for you. And it can, with incremental static regeneration, it can get new data as it's added to the database and refresh it. But your end users are always going to see the latest and greatest version of the data loaded super, super quickly. And to show you how this works, let's create another page. And let's see, how do I want to do this? Bear with me for just a second. Yeah, you know what? We can do this movie_ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the get server side props, which always runs every single time when a user hits your page. This runs on the back end, generates the content, and serves it. We're going to get rid of get server side props. And what we're going to use is another special function in Next.js called get static props. Let's say export async function get static props. And it's going to take parameters. And what we can do is pretty much all of this data, copy it and move it one up. And here we'll say params dot movie ID. Everything else can stay as is. We'll get rid of get server side props. And the other thing we need to add in this return statement is another property called revalidate. And here I'll set it to 1. Now, what this revalidate method does, or property does, is it tells us how often to check if there's new data for the application. And by default, if we set it to 0, it's going to generate it at build time, and then that page will never be updated again. If we set it to 1, then every second, it's going to make a call and see if there's new data. And if not, it essentially treats it like a regular database call. But let's say we wanted to do it, every 60 seconds, or maybe once a day. We would just do like 60 by 60 by 24. So now every day we'll get new data, and if it exists, if not, it's just going to continue serving that static page. But for now, let's just change this to 1. And we need to do one more thing with the get static props method, and that is to add a get static paths method. These two need to work together to enable static regeneration. So the way that this function looks is export async function get static paths. And here we're going to return our paths as an array. We're going to set back the fallback to true. Now, by default, what we would do here is we would populate all of the known routes. So all of the IDs that we wanted to build ahead of time, we would populate in this paths variable. So we could, call MongoDB, go to MongoDB, get a list of IDs, populate it in the paths, and then at build time, build the pages. Or we could leave it empty and just have this pages built as they're requested. So that's the option I'm going to opt for. So we're going to leave the paths array as empty, and we're going to set this fallback property to true, which means that if a page isn't already statically regenerated, go ahead and run the get static props and get the information for it and build the page. So I'm going to hit save here and refresh our page here. And we did get an error, and I think that's because the params are wrong. Just double check. French. Lots of errors. Pages movie ID. Type error. What are we missing?
Do you need to do a console log to see what's in? Oh, you just did.
Just did, but I'm not.
But it's given a problem about title, though.
That's because the movie title here. So the movie didn't get populated. So I'm pretty sure I messed up the params.
And params has an ID. It's printed out. I don't see it.
Let's see if we can debug this real quick.
Params.movie ID.
Params.movie ID is what should be fed. But,
no, but if you're printing it out in the online 39, shouldn't we see it?
Yeah, but we don't. So let me do this. So log. Hello. My favorite way of debugging, right?
Yeah.
So where is that hello?
I usually say made it here.
Right, here.
Yeah. I don't see it.
I don't see it either.
And we're sure the function is called get static props. Is that spelled correctly?
Get static props, get static paths on movie ID. Movie ID, yep. So let's see, what are we missing? We could figure this out.
This is where my lack of React knowledge comes into play.
And if anybody in the comments has any suggestions, we are all ears. Let me restart the app, and maybe sometimes that works, just like npm install. Sometimes a hard restart can fix things.
If you're having a hard restart everything, I think the problem might be you and not npm.
It might be.
You know, do some Windows updates. What do you use? npm version 4 or something?
Oh gosh, I don't even.
Update those chocolatey packages.
npm 6. I don't know if that's good or bad.
I honestly don't know either.
So we get the same error, and
actually I'm on npm 7 point something, so that's a little old.
Yeah. Okay, so let's kick in some debugging skills. Let's say this: if movie, then
we got Alex in the chat saying that we're at 8 at least. So we're both pretty ancient over here, I guess.
Okay. So let's do this thing is why. Ha! So that was it. So
wait, go back. What was the problem? I missed it.
The problem was the get static props method gets called later. So unlike the get server side props, which runs before the component is built, the get static props runs kind of asynchronously as the React component is being built. So our movie movie.title doesn't exist until this gets resolved and gets populated. So
sweet.
That's what happened. So it wasn't an issue with our code. It was an issue with making sure that movie did exist and was populated before getting movie title and the movie poster. So that's the cool thing about get static props. If we look at the next folder now, under static here and pages, let me see if I could find it. Right here. So calling that get static props method actually generated a separate page for that particular movie. And if we look at another movie, let's say in here, I'll get let's get this Batman movie. So we get Batman The Dark Knight Returns Part 2. If we go into the pages directory here, did it get rebuilt? refresh. Where'd it go? Or did it get added on? Server pages. Next. I don't know where it went, but it does generate a static page for it. And to show you that that does work, if we were to, so right now we have Batman Dark Knight Returns and this Milka Bog movie as static pages. And if we were to go in here and set the fallback to false, meaning that if the page isn't generated at build time, don't go and get it, we should still be able to, nope, we don't. So because it did rebuild the application. So with the fallback set to false, if the page isn't generated at build time, because we didn't specify it here, and actually let's do that. So if we pass it in to build it at build time, our page should be available. Does not match the page movie ID. Oh, is it? There we go. So with the fallback set to false, if we say generate this page statically, it's going to be generated and it's going to exist. But for any other movie, like the Batman movie now, we're going to get a 404 page not found because that page wasn't generated ahead of time, and we have the fallback property set to false. And if we change that to true, we should be able to get the Batman page to load as well. So that's kind of a really unique thing. And then with the fallback as well, or with the revalidate, as we update information, like if we were to go in and update the title of the movie and we have the revalidate set to a high number, then that change will not be automatically reflected. So yeah, that's static set regeneration and incremental regeneration. So all of that works. And yeah, so I think we've done plenty of things so far. Does anybody have any questions in the chat? Or Nick, do you have any questions, any feedback, anything you'd like to see? If not, we can slowly wrap it up and I can throw up the code on GitHub if anybody's curious, or you can just download the Next.js example and go from there.
I don't have anything I want to see. This is all pretty good and a lot to take in, especially me not knowing too much about the subject. But we'll leave it open for questions in the chat. I mean, don't be shy. This is a supportive group. If you have a question, please ask it. This is your opportunity.
Yep. Anything, Mongo related, Next.js related, Tailwind CSS related, React related. Those are all technologies I work in almost daily. So happy to help. And in the meantime, I might update my npm version to 8+. Cool. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really unique about Next that I can show in just a few minutes, because I know we are running up on time. Let's see. I guess on deployment, that localhost call will break. Yeah, so if you wanted to, again, if you were building a real-world application, the Next.js team recommends that even in get static props or server-side props, you can actually drop in this code and it'll work just fine. So you don't have to make the call to localhost. But if you did want to call it, then what you could do is in an environment variable, you could say, whatever my app is, app domain, set it to, http myapp.com. And then you would just replace that with process.env.myapp. So then when your app does get deployed, depending on your environment, if you're in localhost or in production, it would get the proper domain and then it would call it up. Does that answer your question, Roman? And the other, I guess I can show one really cool thing with Next.js before we close up. I'll just revert this. In the local variables, by default, all of these variables that you define here are protected. They are never sent to the browser. So if you wanted to access any of these, you can access them in your API routes in get server-side props, but you can't access them in your components. But if you did have a variable that you know was going to change from environment to environment, and you wanted to be able to access it in your React components, you could do next public, and then like let's say Google Analytics is a popular one, so you could say GA equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So having this next_public prefix on your environment variables means that you can actually use it in the React components, and they are going to be exposed to the front end. So here on the, let's see, on the index homepage, we can do console.log process.env.nextPublic DA. So, let's say we had Google Analytics set up and we wanted to change it from staging to production to our local dev environment. We'll be able to access it in both. Is this the homepage? It is. We got an undefined because with environment variables, you need to restart the application to load any environment changes. So let's make sure that did work. App is building. And boom. So now we can access our environment variable both in the browser as well as in the backend, so with server-side props or API routes, just by using process.env.next_public. So that's pretty much all that I had planned for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. And if you have any questions, you could follow me at Kukic on Twitter, or find me on the MongoDB community, or really just LinkedIn, whatever your platform of choice is. I'm on all of them.
Dude, this was great. So then while we wait for maybe last minute questions to trickle in, I am going to share my screen to go over some group logistics. So let me start sharing it. All right. Is my screen visible to everyone? No, it's not. It's still auto. My bad. All right. Now my screen is visible to everyone. I'm pretty confident of it.
Yep.
So this is the tracydevs.com website. It is the meetup group website. If you're new to the group, this is where we list all of our events, which are also found on meetup.com, Eventbrite. But tracydevs.com is the single source of truth when it comes to the events. They'll show up here first. We are looking for speakers for the remainder of the year. So if you're interested, if you feel like you've got something interesting to share and you want to share it with the group, we'd love to have you. It doesn't matter your skill set or how proficient you are with the technology. And you don't have to be in Tracy. So I expect that we're going to be remote for the rest of 2021. So don't let the location deter you. For October, I'm in the process of finalizing a presenter from Vonage. So we're going to see some various Vonage APIs and services for messaging and things like that, which will be pretty interesting stuff. But beyond that, we're still a work in progress for lining up speakers. But go ahead and subscribe to the mailing list. So the mailing list, I only ever send out 2 messages per month on the mailing list. So the first message is a reminder that an event is happening such and such week. And then I also send out a follow-up email after the event with the on-demand video link. So those are the only 2 messages that you're ever going to receive from this mailing list. So you won't receive any kind of spam or anything like that. And the reminders are helpful. So please go ahead and subscribe to that as well while you're there. That's all I have as far as logistics go. It doesn't look like any other comments have trickled in. So Otto, I think this is great. You said you're going to share your code. Do you want me to wait on sending out the recap email until you have everything finalized?
Yeah, I could get it up over the weekend, and maybe Monday we can share it out.
That'd be great. I'll include the link after you send it to me.
Sweet. And just curious, who is the guest from Vonage? Do you have a name yet?
So I don't have a name yet. I'm talking to the director over there. He's gonna sync me up with someone over there. If you know of somebody in particular that would be worthy of coming to the group, you can certainly send in your nomination.
Definitely, yeah. I'll think about it. I know a lot of the Vonage folks, so I was just curious.
Yeah, they are everywhere over there, right?
Right on. Well, Nick, thanks again for having me, and everybody, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you found this useful and picked up a new thing or two. But as always, if you have questions, find me on Twitter, and happy to help.
Absolutely. Okay, everyone, have a great weekend and a great night.
Thanks all.